Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about my tarot practice all throughout the month of June 2024. June was a very busy month, so as you'll see, my deck selection is a little bit smaller than it was the month previous, and I didn't quite finish all the things I set out to do, but that's okay because sometimes that happens, life gets in the way. It was all for good reasons, so I'm totally okay with that. One of the things that I did in June was I popped up to Canada to visit with my bestie Lisa Pepez, who I'm sure you all know and love as well. We had this little whirlwind trip up there where Kevin and I went up for like just a couple of days. I got to hang out with Lisa and we did some shopping, we had some tea, and it was an amazing experience. I did a whole little like haul of all the things that I got while I was north of the border, also because I raided Lisa's purgatory drawer. So I went shopping at Lisa's house. So that took a big chunk of time out of my month because I took that week off. Like I took an actual little vacation and it was beautiful. Also coming out of that, I was doing the prepping for the Weavers Fair, which was a big live weekend event, 4 sessions, 2 hours each, like 8 hours of basically me, in a sense, leading my weavers through the fair. We played games, we had events, we captured some wayward creatures. It was kind of like a D&D session where we met periodically throughout the weekend. And then I also made it available for solo playback for anybody who didn't get a chance to do the live. So that took the rest of the month really, because I had to prep for that. And then I hosted the thing all weekend long. And it was amazing. And thank you so much to all of my weavers who came and hung out and participated. It was a blast. I had such a great time. So my month is a little bit lighter in terms of what I did with my practice and my cards. And as you'll see when we get to my journals, I didn't even finish those. And that's okay, because like this reflects my real life, right? My real practice. And I don't always finish everything in a timely manner. I will finish it eventually. It just doesn't always happen right from the get-go. So I'm gonna have a sip of coffee because it's morning here and I'm trying to like get back in the groove of making content after, you know, doing all of these live events, because that's a totally different energy than when you're sitting down here to record. So let's go ahead and jump into the decks that I worked with throughout the month. We're going to start with these sort of main working decks that I had. Then we'll take a look at a couple of decks that I used for a specific practice and then my fellowship decks, and then we'll take a look at my incomplete journals. So I intentionally chose this Bee and Pomegranate card from the Woodland Wardens. We'll take a quick flip through that deck. I have semi-modified mine. The borders were just really big. I just trimmed them down a little bit smaller and I edged it. I'll show you that here in a minute. But I intentionally chose this card because Bee is an energy that I'm continuing to work with. I worked with it last month. I'm continuing to work with it into this month. And I'm working with Persephone energy as well, and Pomegranate is one of her symbols. And the keyword was productivity, which was great because like I really was quite productive most of the month. I was working on really, really big projects. So I intentionally pulled this card out of the Woodland Wardens and I set it on my desk, and it was like my focus for the month. And you'll see that reflected in my journal as well. So I had Bee and Pomegranate with my focus for the month. I'll just take a quick flip through. I'll show you the deck that I worked with that card primarily. Even though this deck, the Woodland Wardens, actually looks really great with the deck that here's the backs. There's my edging job, which I just did this like, I don't know, faded antique-y thing. I just made this deck a little bit smaller. I really like this deck. It's a great blend of plants and animals. The imagery is absolutely gorgeous. It tells you what you're looking at, so what animal, what plant, and then there's a keyword at the bottom. The little guidebook for this is really nice too, so I do tend to get into it. And it actually pairs really well with a lot of decks in my collection, so I really like this for the energy of blending and bringing in animal and plants into a reading. Animals and plants are not really something that I work with a ton. I have a ton of plant decks, but I don't really intentionally work with plant energy in a proper way. I'm just like, I like botanicals. It's the aesthetic of it. I like the kind of broad keywords that kind of get brushed over botanical decks most of the time. It just allows it to be really open for me, but then also gives me that beautiful visual of the plant that I love. And so I tend to use plant decks a lot for aesthetics and of course for the keywords and the energy, but I'm not necessarily like tapping into the like real deep underlying meaning of the plant. Do you know what I mean? Same with animals. I do the same thing with animals. I totally admit I'm very surface level when it comes to my plant and animal decks. And I kind of love that this is what this deck feels like to me. And I don't mean that in any sort of a negative way. It's a bonus for me because I feel like this is a deck that I can work with even having a very bare bones basic understanding of plant and animal energy. It gives me everything that I need to work with it in a way that does feel intentional and meaningful, but it isn't like I'm not so overloaded with it, right? It's not requiring me to do an in-depth study of plants and animals in order to work with it. And I really appreciate that about this deck. I love this card. It's one of my favorites in the deck. So I really love working with this one. And while I have worked with it many, many times, I didn't actually work with the deck itself. I just wanted to kind of mention it because I worked with this card intentionally, right? My bee and my pomegranate. So I worked with it intentionally with this card. So I kept pulling this card out as my focal point in my reading. So anytime I did a reading working with this energy, I had this card in the center. Sometimes I would occasionally pull other things in, but like nothing that I used consistently throughout the month. I did do a lot of dice casting with these two decks. So dice casting is a system that Lisa and I created, or kind of our own little hybrid blend of dice and divination that we created, that we've both been working with. And we will be sharing more about that system coming up in July. So keep an eye out. If you've been waiting for the dice casting, it is coming, I promise. So the deck I worked with alongside this particular card, and I do want to just make note, there are some challenging cards in this deck, things with like nails through hands, there are spiders and things of that nature. I did not pull out any of more touchy cards, so just please be aware as we're flipping through. As always, there's timestamps below if you want to jump to any piece or part of this video. I love this deck. It's a pip style deck. I've talked about it many, many times on my channel. It is a bit confrontational and I really like that, but also the pip nature of it means that it's very open for me to read in a style that is in alignment with how I was taught to read tarot. So what I mean by that is very numerologically and elementally and not so deeply rooted into the RWS system. That's my preferred method, although I do layer in RWS meaning quite often. But when I work with a pip deck, it's almost like it gives me extra permission to read in a way that I want to, because I'm not really being nudged into a particular interpretation through the artwork, right? And that's one of the reasons I like a pip deck, is it's more open for me. I enjoy working with it. It really allows me to dive into the elemental and numerological. I also feel that it's really a lot more open for me to let the oracle have a little bit of a bigger part of the reading. So I love working with this one. It's one of my favorites. I've had it for a long time, and it's one that I just really enjoy working with. I use it a lot for kind of setting intention for the month. It just has the right energy for me. I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm in this space currently in my life. I don't know what that says about me. That's just where I feel like I am. I'm in this mixed hybrid thing of this bee, pomegranate, Persephone energy, but also in this kind of a little bit, I guess maybe confrontational, but also like trying to get back to like an authentic place, right? Because for me, reading a pip style deck is actually more of an authentic style of reading for me, right? It's more in alignment with how I personally see the cards. Even though I can read an RWS deck, I can read a Thoth deck. I'm very familiar with both of them, but I just prefer this method. So it feels like using a pip deck for me is like getting back to that authentic place of where I learned to read tarot, right? Of what it means to me on a very bare bones sort of level. And a deck like that, just really allows me to do it. Also, like, look at these together. It's kind of amazing, right? I love that. So I used the Cursed Auguries quite a bit for my readings. And real quick, I'm just going to mention the Bee Tarot again, because I did also use this one alongside the Cursed Auguries, again, having my bee and my pomegranate card in the center. I have edged mine in a beautiful yellow color. I did show this deck last month and I talked about it quite a bit, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but this is the deck that I'm currently using for any sort of work-related stuff, creative work, community work, that type of thing, right? Because to me, that's what this deck embodies. It embodies the energy of sort of productivity and busyness and work-related and creativity and community. And it's really been cool. I really love this deck. I don't know, I feel like this deck's having a moment. I've seen everybody talk about it. It's for me, this is a Krista made me do it. Krista of Krista Chronicles. If you've not checked out her channel, like, I'm gonna link her below, because like, I mean, okay, so she's a friend, like, you know, all honesty. But before she was a friend, I was a fan of her channel and still am, and I adore everything that she creates. So if you haven't checked her out yet, definitely go do that. She had talked about this deck in a video, and I just was kind of like, oh, that's perfect for creative work and for like my work as a deck to represent the work that I do here in this space on my channel and in my writing and things like that. And it's just been really a beautiful deck for that. I've really been enjoying working with it. It was kind of the focus of last month, so I don't want to talk about it too much here, but I'm still working with it. I did pull the Beltane Oracle in again. Is it the Beltane? I don't even remember. The one that I showed last month, I pulled that in on occasion, but I did work with these two together, some also using the focus of my bee and pomegranate because Persephone works. So let's talk about that. So Persephone as a story, a divine feminine energy, as a mythology is something that I'm currently engaged with and studying. I have been talking about it some with my members as well. I have been using 2 different decks specifically for connecting to the energy of Persephone for this particular month. I'm going to be continuing this work into July, and I've got even more decks that I'm going to be adding in, so we'll be talking about that next month. I did also get 2 little sort of emblems or totems to have on my desk when I'm doing Persephone work. I mean, they just live on my desk anyway, but I pull them into my work here with Persephone. So this is one of the little divine feminine figures that I got from Bridget's Grove, I believe is the name of the shop on Etsy. I'll leave it linked below. I have several of these. This is the one that I got for representation for Persephone. That's not what they called it. It's just a red one. And for me, red is a color that I associate with Persephone. And that now sits on my table next to my Hecate one. I also got this glass pomegranate. So this now, I think it's actually a vase, but I just have it sitting on my desk. And again, it's there for a representation. And then funny enough, with it is sitting, I think I showed this last time. It is I think it's called Hoodoo Honey is the name. I picked it up at a local shop on the Oregon coast. And it just, for me, this is bee representation, right? So now I have bee representation through the candle because it looks like a honeycomb and it's yellow with the glass pomegranate. And these I was kind of using as to, you know, create that representation on my table while I was doing this work. So, you know, it's about, for me, it's about intentions, you know, setting intention when I'm doing the work. Things, I'm kind of a magpie when it comes to that. Things, I like things around me, representations of the energies because they create a visual representation on my table, and I really enjoy that. And then those things become sacred to me. It's like all my little crystal skulls that are sitting everywhere. Like this is Chetney. I've shown him a million times on my channel. He is like he's a howlite, and he's just like my go-to crystal for like, I don't know, anytime I'm feeling like a little bit like I'm just fiddly, I'm fiddly. This is who I pull out. And it just, he lives here and I'm attached to him now. It's a thing. Okay, so let's talk about the decks that I worked with. This is I made a bag for it. I have not edged it yet. This is the Tarot of Persephone's Garden, which I got last month, I do believe. And I'm having a moment with this deck. I love it. I think that this is, for me, is going to be my fine art deck. I've had a lot of decks over the years that have this kind of energy. I don't want to forget my coffee. I've had a lot of decks over the years that have had, you know, curated art like that for death. I mean, that's amazing. And I've rehomed a lot of them because they start to feel really similar to me. Like, I'll be honest, because it is the same artwork and it's being, you know, represented across various different cards, and that's cool. But I feel like this is the one for me that's going to stick. Like this for the devil, like it has so many good representations in it that make sense to me personally. And not only for how I'm currently working with Persephone, but just for how I view the energy of the tarot itself. So in terms of being a curated art deck, this one might be the one for me. I really love it. I'm like that. Just amazing. It's just amazing. I think it's just so beautifully done. Like, I just cannot even sing its praises high enough. I'm so excited that I have it now. It just works beautifully. The presentation of the deck is gorgeous. A lot of times when you get these curated art decks, sometimes the art really isn't very clear because people are pulling them from places where the resolution's not really great. This one's been done really, really beautifully. Everything's been framed and cropped beautifully, and it's gorgeous. I really, really love it. And it's on this beautiful, like, linen cardstock that just shuffles like a dream. So I've been working with this deck as a way to connect with that Persephone energy. This month I was pairing it with the Flower Oracle. This is one of the newer decks by Broccoli Magazine. I am having a moment with this deck as well. I have all of their decks. I love their decks. I think they produce amazing works of art. So it's a collage deck, and as always, like, their collaging is flawless. It's just the most gorgeous piece of collage artwork. And I love their setup on their decks because they have the keyword that tells you basically what is on the card, and then we have 3 keywords underneath, which I love because I use those as spread positions. So I've talked about it like a million times on my channel, but this becomes my focal point. This is what I'm tapping into, and then I pull tarot to represent the 3 keywords of where do I need patience, beginning, and vanity, right? Maybe I don't need vanity. Maybe that's something that I'm struggling with. Who knows? But it works so well. Like, I just love everything about their decks. The cardstock is beautiful matte. It's traditional oracle size. The setup on it is beautiful. It's just so professionally done. So yeah, I really love this deck. It's beautiful. I think there's always 44 cards. I want to say 44 cards in these decks. They are all produced on the same cardstock. They are all produced in the same format and layout, which means that if I wanted to, I could pull them all into a reading together, and they look beautiful. Also, if I really wanted to, I could also curate my own little sort of collection of oracles with them. So if I wanted to include, I think I have flower, mushroom, and seashell at this point. I am hoping that they create more. Let's see these 2 together because they are beautiful. I'm gonna pop this one down just a little bit so it's not quite so high. I love these 2 decks together. So like I said, I was using them as this was primarily my focal point, and then I was actually pulling 3 cards to correlate with the 3 keywords. I was also including dice casting in this particular work, and I'll show you my Persephone dice here in a minute, because of course I have Persephone dice. So yeah, these together are amazing. I love how the borders on the Flower Oracle create that breathing room, that white space around the imagery. These are borderless, so it works really well because it gives me space to really look at where I want to be focusing those energies. And even when I have them with this up top and the 3 cards underneath, like it still works really well. It's beautiful. Also, the whole energy of these 2, like they have a very similar color palette. The art styles are very compatible, and I think they look beautiful together. So we got Violet with faithfulness, modesty, and remembrance between the 8 of Wands and the 8 of Coins. Interesting with 2 8s there. Yeah, I do really like these decks together. I think they work really well. I do have some other decks that I'm going to be pulling in with my Persephone work. Some new decks and a new energy because I'm starting to pull in Hades energy as well, and I'll be doing that in July. So we'll probably be seeing this deck again in July along with some new ones, and I'll just show you real quick because dice is now a thing that I've been integrating into my practice on the whole, which is amazing, and I love it because I've always been a dice goblin. These are my Persephone dice. There's nothing really fancy about them. My D20 likes to roll really high numbers, so was really fun. And they're just gorgeous. They're like this red and pink kind of marbly blend with the gold lettering. You know, it's beautiful with this deck. And it's just an Amazon set of dice. They're not fancy or expensive or anything. So this is definitely the dice that I've been using for that. And I love them. So let's talk about now the decks that I worked with throughout the fellowship, which is the guided sort of tarot practice / adventure that I'm doing in the membership on my channel. And I used a weird assortment of decks this month, and it was great. I really loved it. So let's go ahead and talk about each one, and I'll tell you what I did with them. So the main 2 decks that I worked with are the Margaret Peterson Tarot, and this is the Cirque de Tarot. And I've talked about these 2 together many, many times because they always come out together. There's something about these 2 decks that if I've got one, I've usually got the other. And they're kind of, I wouldn't say they're completely monogamous. Here, let's look at the backs for a minute. Like even the backs are great together, right? I wouldn't say they're completely monogamous with each other, but I think they really work well. I use the Margaret Peterson a lot like an oracle. I do pull the tarot associations in because they are really fantastic in this deck. I almost always get into the guidebook because it's just an amazingly written little guidebook. I tend to pull that energy in, but I also tend to only work with one of these most of the time, and I put them in the center position as the focal point. So this is like, for me, this becomes the overarching tarot energy. So I'll put that in the center. I love this deck. It took me a long time to come around to this deck. I had the version with the gray borders and I did not like it. Like it just, and I should have liked it. Everything about that gray border says it should have been my jam, but it was not. And I ended up rehoming that one. And then I got to this one. And this is the one that clicked for me. They have totally different energies. I know it's the same art, but for me, they have totally different energies. And so it was just really interesting, that whole experience of having this deck with just the different borders. And that to me just goes to show that like sometimes borders do matter. So the deck that I pair it with most often is this Cirque de Tarot, which I love this deck. There's just something about this deck. It's fun. I get the interpretations. I think I've done a whole video on this because the court cards were a challenge for a lot of people. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about this deck. So I think I did a whole video on it. I'll see if I can find it and link it below. But I really love this deck. It's got such a great energy. It is one, and this is a pairing, and this deck tends to be one that I really only pull out in the summertime, but that's fine. Like I have decks that sometimes are very seasonally associated for me, and I'm okay with that. So these two together, oh, the Margaret Peterson's really tall. Let's just pull that down a little bit because I'm trying to be mindful of my shadows here. These two together are just, I don't know, there's something about them that just really works for me. And so I use these in my fellowship as my main two decks. So I use this in place of where I would normally use an oracle. And I had this as my main focal point in my reading. So we have the High Priestess here with the Page of Swords and the Moon. I mean, beautiful. And then I use the Cirque de Tarot to, to sit in other spread positions. So when we do the fellowship, unlike some of my other practices where I'm just like throwing cards on the table just to see where things land, and I create just configurations as I go. With the fellowship, we do have set positions. We do have certain things that we're doing. We're also rolling dice to influence different decisions and outcomes and things like that. So everything is fairly structured. So I follow along with the structure myself. And I use the cards in their associated positions. These two together, like, I don't know. It's probably a me thing. But they just work so beautifully. I just love the abstract nature of the Margaret Peterson. And then these like beautiful fantasy, it's like bringing that abstract energy into a language that I can understand, I think is what it is. Because like, let's face it, y'all, I live in a fantasy world a lot of the time, right? I spend a lot of time, reading and playing video games and, engaged in fandoms and things like that. So I do spend a lot of my time in make-believe, in fantasy. And this particular deck, I think that the thing for me is that it kind of creates a language or maybe an interpretation for the Margaret Peterson, which sometimes can be a bit abstract, and I don't always necessarily get it right from the get-go what it's trying to tell me. But then when I pair it with the Cirque de Tarot, which does speak to me in a language I understand because it does feel like it's engaged in this fantasy world, it just creates, oh my goodness, look at this with all the fire. It just creates sort of an interpretation, a bridge between me and the Margaret Peterson. And then like, for whatever reason, it just clicks and I get it. This is amazing. The Three of Flames here with the Margaret Peterson, the Three of Wands, essentially again, Three of Flames here with the Cirque de Tarot, and the Four of Wands. That's really cool. Okay, let's just do one more. Ooh, there's those court cards that I love. Okay, Strength between the Knight of Pentacles and the King of Cups. Again, there's a progression with the courts, and I know a lot of people have issue with this deck because the artwork is very, very similar, if not the same in some of the cards. And there's a reason for it. It totally makes sense to me, and I did a whole video on it, but like I get it's not everybody's cup of tea, so I understand that, but I love it. I think I said I was only gonna do one more. Okay, that's the last one. So I use these as my main decks for the fellowship. So I'm just gonna tuck that one up there for right now. There was a couple of times where I felt the need to pull in an actual oracle into the reading or into the spread or the particular position. So when I felt that need, I pulled the Illuminated Earth Oracle. This one actually worked really well with the Margaret Peterson and the Cirque de Tarot. I wasn't really sure when I pulled it out, but it's kind of abstract-y. This one is matte gold gilded. It's beautiful. But it's very sort of elemental, abstract-y, but also it feels a bit more in a sense, kind of rooted and grounded. It feels a bit more earthy. So it was really interesting to pair with the Margaret Peterson, which for me feels very abstract and kind of like it's earthy, but outside of self-earthy. That makes no sense. It makes sense in my brain, I promise. The Cirque du Tarot for me is very much a fiery, sort of summery energy deck. And then I pulled in this Illuminated Earth, which is also a little bit more abstract, but it feels like it has a bit more of a rooted and grounded energy to it. So it was a great one to kind of pull in. I got the Underworld card, which I love. It was a great one to pull in to kind of like anchor into things. So when I had readings or activities, really prompts, that I felt like I needed to pull in a little bit of that energy, I pulled this deck into the reading. And it worked really well. I was actually quite surprised by how well it paired and played with the rest of these decks. And it was a great choice for that. I really enjoyed it. I only pulled a couple because I only pulled it in a few times, but it worked beautifully. So every month we also have our loot, or I should say every week we have a loot card that we pull. And just for funsies, I pulled out the Shaman's Oracle to use as my loot deck. Here's the back. So this one, I found this to be really interesting for a loot deck. Because I did have to kind of get into the book a little bit to get a little bit more context around some of the cards and what I was seeing and how I was gonna relate that to loot as an energy and as a message, and then a prompt, because we are collecting loot all throughout the year. And then at the end of the year, we're going to be doing something with that whole treasure trove of loot that we've been collecting. And none of the weavers know what it is yet, which is amazing. But because I knew that what I needed to do with it, some of these, like I was like Hunter of Paths, that doesn't really tell me much. So I'd have to get into the guidebook and kind of pull out a keyword that I could kind of tuck into my loot list to help me work with it in that way. This deck with the Margaret Peterson is amazing. I really, really liked it. I mean, it was okay with the Cirque du Tarot. Like, I mean, it's not the best thing ever, but with the Margaret Peterson, it was really cool. Loot gets pulled separately anyway. It doesn't necessarily have to be ingrained into the rest of the reading. And so it worked really well, but I did play with just for fun a couple of times here. Let me show you real quick. These videos are always so crazy. So in this case, I actually did, I'm not gonna have space, probably not. I actually did the reverse that I usually do with the Margaret Peterson, because usually it's in the center, and this time when I was playing with these together, I put the Shaman's Oracle in the center. And it worked really well. It was like taking those big picture, that big energy that's sort of really above. I'm having a really hard time articulating it. It's such a difficult thing to talk about, but that idea of kind of, let's just say, for lack of a better way to describe it, your soul self versus your primal self. That's how this pairing felt to me. Like mind, body, like higher self, animal self, instinct self. And it was really cool. I did a few little readings just playing with these two just to see how they would work together. And it was really interesting. I definitely got into the guidebook for both of these decks, but I was really heavily leaning on the guidebook for the Shaman's Oracle because like I really need the guidebook to work with this deck. Normally that's a drawback for me, but this is not a deck that I would pull out just for any random reading, right? So I feel like it worked because I was doing very intentional work with it. And so getting into the guidebook was fine. And it was just a really interesting way to play with that idea of the higher self versus the primal self. And I just had to play with it. It was fun. So I did play with those two together a little bit, like outside of the fellowship, but just having to play with them. Real quick before we move into our journals, I will share with you the dice that I used throughout the month. This is my dice box for the weavers. Obviously, I have 4 of these dice boxes now that I have various things in here. The main dice that I was working with were these red ones that I used for some of the readings. They're just a little bit brighter red. It kind of just depended on what we were doing. A little brighter red with some gold. Again, just Amazon dice. This entire box currently is just full of Amazon dice. There's nothing fancy in here. Then I also used this one. So kind of how I used them is, for me, these dice connected to the Margaret Peterson. Again, the coloring with the sort of maroon and the gold. And then these ones with the little brighter red I used with the Cirque du Tarot. So that's kind of how I divided them up. And depending on what cards I was rolling on, depended on what what dice set I was using. And I've shown my dice box before. These are my guardian dice. These are my companion dice. I won't go into it. This is all my little trinkets and stuff. I do have more to add because after the fair, I have some more things that I'm going to get to add. I mean, I was hosting the fair, so I didn't get to play the fair, but I'm going to go back and solo the fair so that I can grab all the loot and get all the goodies. And there's one particular, like, there's a new pet. And I really, really want the pet, so I gotta go solo the fair so that I can get the pet for myself. But anyway, this is where I keep all my little trinkets and goodies, and I pull all of this out when I'm doing my fellowship, and it's great because I have all these little representations on the table of what I'm working with. All right, I'm gonna move my coffee so that we can jump into my journals. Again, I apologize for the birds. I feel like I apologize for the birds in every video because I don't know what their deal is lately, but they are just loud. So my journal portion today is gonna be pretty quick because I didn't do much in my journal this month because I was very busy. I did my June setup at the beginning of the month. Again, you can see that I had pulled my intentional card with the bee and the pomegranate. This was my reading initially to start the month. I just did some journaling. These were some stickers that I had left over from when I did my planner, and I did some little nail doodles. And yeah, some plant doodles. Apparently I did some doodles and stickers in this one. And these are always great. I love setting these up. They're so much fun. I really enjoy having this sort of like overarching idea and theme that I'm gonna be kind of working with. So for June, it was productivity, and that was a great one. I really do feel like I integrated that idea really well into my practice overall. And the only other reading that I got in here for June, which is fine, is my main Persephone reading that I did. I did lots of other sort of connecting with Persephone, sort of conversing with that energy through some other readings, but this was kind of like my foundational one for the month, and it was all about seeds. So I have my cards that I pulled in here, my dice rolls, because I did this one with our full dice casting system. It was amazing. I used just some stickers. Yeah, this was my sort of foundational Persephone work for the month, which actually was really great. Again, using the dice casting system, so I had particular prompts this time, and I had particular questions that I was answering. And so using the dice and the cards. And so that's all integrated in here. This was great, and this was all I have. So I still do want to do my sort of wrap up for the month that I've been doing previously. You can see here's the one that I did for the last month, where I just kind of take a moment to do some reflection, but I didn't have time to do that yet. So like sometimes my journals are still in progress at this point and I'm catching up, and that's totally fine. I definitely want to validate that as an experience too. You don't always have to be on time and on the ball with your journaling. Like, it's there when you are ready to engage with it, and you can catch up at any time. Speaking of which, let's take a look at my fellowship journal. I think I've mentioned every month, both my main journal and my fellowship journal are journals from the Creeping Moon. There will be links for those in the description box below. I'm not finished with the June adventure because we had the Weavers Fair, and I had to kind of take some time off from my own practice to really focus on that and create that so that I could present that throughout the whole weekend as basically like I said, kind of like a D&D campaign. We are taking the first week of July off with the intention of giving people time to not only catch up on their adventure if they need to, but also to attend the fair if they didn't get a chance to attend it live, because you can watch it back, you can solo it if you want, and those are definitely things. Well, I'm not gonna watch it back because I was there, but I want to solo the Weavers Fair because we got things and I want to play too. So I'm gonna be finishing my fellowship for June and then doing the Weavers Fair throughout the first week of July. So I will have finished this by the time we see next month's. But chapter 6 was the Fire Mountains, and our first week was the Perilous Path. So we had our initiative where we start the week. We have our encounter, which is the sort of reading, the big reading or the event or the activity that we're doing through the week. And then we pull our loot card. I've just started with some doodles in here of the mountains because our first was this path that we were going through. And then the second week we had unexpected moments, which was fun. The encounter did not go the way I wanted it to, but that's okay. I didn't cheat it. I went with what actually happened according to the dice rolls and the cards that I pulled. So even though it wasn't the outcome I wanted, I stuck with it. Anyway, so I have that one in here and that was fun. So I still need to finish up the last 2 weeks, which will be fine. These are designed that they can be done like at 3 different settings, 3 different times, because the initiation, the encounter, and the loot are all set as separate things, but they are actually designed to all work together as well. And most of the time I just sit down and do them all at once. I have my initiation, my encounter, and then I pull my loot at the end, and I do them as one big reading and then put them in here that way. So it's really just just sitting down for 2 more little sessions with my fellowship adventure to do the practice for June. So that's it. That's all I have because it was a pretty busy month and I didn't really have a lot of time to really engage in a bunch of variety of practices. I really was focused on my sort of month ahead energy that I was working with, my bee, pomegranate energy, my Persephone work, and then my fellowship. And that was pretty much it. That really kept me occupied through most of the month. And, you know, doing my dice casting and things like that. As I mentioned, that is coming in July. So keep an eye out for that on both mine and Lisa's channel. As always, I'll have links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope that you had a wonderful June and I wish you many blessings moving into July.